Hello and welcome to this video on composing with open music. Today we're going to be taking a look at using a constraint solver library in OM Sharp. A couple of quick announcements before we get started with this tutorial. I'll be planning to release some additional future videos, so keep an eye out for those. If you'd like to know when they have been posted, I'd encourage you to subscribe to this channel. Additionally, if the videos on this channel have been helpful to you, either in your compositional practice or perhaps your teaching, consider taking a moment to offer some support on Ko-fi. Third, take a moment to subscribe to my newsletter, Creativity and Constraint. That's where I'm posting some additional thoughts on music, composing, creativity, as well as updates about my work. And for this tutorial, I'll also be uploading the patch that we're working on here today. So if you'd like a copy of that, take a moment to subscribe and that will be available to you. Today we're going to be taking a look at the OMCS library. This is a library that you can use with both open music as well as OM Sharp. This library was ported from PW Constraints, a library that was used for PWGL, which is a sort of precursor or a cousin to the open music application. The Open Music GitHub project page credits Mikael Laurison and Orjan Sandred for their work on this library, and you might find it interesting to note that Sandred has released a very helpful book on computer-assisted composition that includes some examples in both PWGL and open music. I thought this book gave a really excellent introduction to CAC and some wonderful frameworks for thinking about how computer-assisted composition can be a help for the composer. And as I mentioned, the appendix of the book has quite a few very helpful examples that you can look at in both PWGL and open music patches. So I found this book particularly helpful in beginning to understand the OMCS library and use that in my own work. On the topic of this documentation, I'd also like to take a moment to point out the official documentation. This is available online. It is rather dated. This is actually the official documentation for OMCS remains the documentation for the PW Constraints library from which it was ported. So you'll note if you take a look at this that it includes some elements of the user interface that are pretty old, but it gives a lot of really helpful information just about the inner workings of this library. Do note that a large portion of it involves some Lisp code, so if you're not familiar with that, that might take a little bit of time to understand, but I found that this documentation gave a really helpful overview of the sorts of problems that this library is capable of helping you solve. So that documentation is available. I'd recommend taking a look at it if you're interested. But for now, we will move over to OM Sharp and begin taking a look at this patch. One thing to note as we begin working in OM Sharp is that unlike OM, you'll have to take a moment to load some external libraries if you have not already done so. So for example, just a moment ago, I clicked over to this External Libraries tab and double-clicked on OMCS to load this library. Now, OM Sharp is telling me that it's already loaded, so I won't load it at the moment, but do note that you'll want to do that to be able to access the objects that we're going to begin instantiating in this patch. Additionally, I have just taken a quick moment to produce this chord sequence box and just populate it with some pitches that we will use. This is the domain of the problem that we will be describing for the PMC engine object to begin evaluating a solution. And that sounds a little technical, but we'll take a look at that in just a moment. This is just a way of telling Open Music that these are the pitches that we will give it to work with as we begin defining the constraint problem that we would like for it to solve. So with that out of the way, let's take a moment and begin adding some helpful objects into this patch as we look at solving this constraint problem. What I would like to do with this patch, just so that you have an idea of where we are going, is in this patch what I'd like to do is be able to create a chord that will not repeat any given pitch class. So this chord will contain, for example, only one C or only one F or F sharp. So we won't have any duplication of pitches at the octave. The chord should be produced in an ascending order. And of course, as we think about music representation in a score, that might sound a little silly to be thinking of a chord in an ascending order, but that'll become clear in a moment. And then finally, I'd like to constrain the intervals that are allowed for the construction of this chord. So those are going to be the main three rules that we begin using as we work on this patch. So for now, I'm going to double click and go ahead and type in PMC engine. And this will create this engine item. This is really kind of the brain of this OMCS library. This is where we will feed OMCS the information about the problem that we want it to solve. And so I'm going to go ahead and add some additional inlets here. We'll have just a couple other items that we might be interested in and just expand that a little bit. So let's return to the domain of this problem. I'm going to go ahead and add a flat item here, just so that all of these pitches are in a flat list of only kind of one hierarchical level. So we have this list of pitches. And what we're going to do, the chords that we will produce will have only 7 unique pitches. And so because of that, at each step along the way, we're going to have to tell this OMCS PMC engine what the permitted list of pitches is. And so what that means is that we're going to need actually 7 instances of this flattened list. And so I'm going to create a repeat n box right below this flat function. And I'm going to tell it to repeat 7 times. And if we evaluate that, we can see over here on the right, it looks like we've got 7 of those items. Assuming that this is all working correctly, I have no reason to doubt that it is. And so we will carry on for the moment with that, knowing that when we plug that into this PMC engine in this first inlet describing the space, the solution space, that we will have the requisite number of solution space items for it to begin evaluating this problem. And so with that, I'm going to begin the next step by adding a list item and populating it with a couple of inlets. And this will become now the input for this second inlet here, which is the rules that the PMC engine will be working with. I'm going to leave that there for a moment and just take a look at the last couple of inlets that I'm interested in. And we're going to go ahead and move over to this solutions mode, just because I find this kind of interesting. So what I've done is I've hovered over this inlet and held down Shift and clicked, and that has populated now this little once keyword. And basically that's just going to tell this engine to only produce one solution, only one chord. Note that you can change this keyword. I could type in :all, and the PMC engine would continue evaluating until it had arrived at all of the solutions for this particular problem. And that can be helpful if you're looking for a large number of solutions. I believe you can also specify a numeric number of how many solutions, so I could say only give me 8 solutions or 24 solutions. But for now, we're going to just stick with once. And I think for the moment that will suffice. So now we'll get into really the heart of this patch, which is going to be these various rules that we will add to this list. So in order to begin adding rules, we're going to create a new box and type in wildcard rule. And I'm going to go ahead and drag that to this first inlet. And while I'm here, I'm just going to copy and paste a couple more instances of these rules to use for this list. So we have these wildcard rules, and I'm going to go ahead and just select one of these and press D to pull up the documentation over here in the listener. If you're used to Open Music, OM, like in previous videos I've used, I forget what version of OM6, you'll remember that in OM, typing D when a factory box was selected would pull up documentation in your browser. For OM#, typing D when a factory box is selected will pull up the documentation just right here in the listener. So we'll take a quick look at this and note what it says about the wildcard rule. It takes any function and creates a PMC rule out of it. The inputs to the function will be called question1, question2, etc. And the function might be an OM patch in the lambda state. A rule should output either true or false. And that's distinguished from a heuristic rule, which is also a possibility in the OMCS library. Those heuristic rules can actually be input with this third inlet. And the difference between these rules and these heuristic rules, this second inlet for these rules, these are very strict rules. And again, we can see that with the fact that the rules output either true or false. So the OMCS library with these wildcard rules is determining does this next pitch that we're considering using to construct this chord fit the criteria or does it not? It's a binary state, and OMCS will make kind of an all or nothing determination based on how that portion of the patch evaluates. These heuristic rules, by contrast, produce a sort of weighted number as their output of evaluation, which basically helps OMCS determine is this pitch a fairly good fit for constructing this chord or a fairly poor fit. So it's not an all or nothing yes or no, but is something more like determining how well this particular partial solution might accommodate a number of constraints. So that's just a quick overview of that difference. For now, we're going to instantiate an internal patch. I've just right-clicked and selected that from the pop-up menu, and we'll quick rename this as ascending order. And I'm going to go ahead right now, just so I don't forget, and select that patch and type L to place it in lambda mode. So we have this internal patch now, and we're going to begin by instantiating a box called partial solution. And to demonstrate what this is like, I'm just going to quick create a chord sequence box here so we can just kind of see some notation as we work. So for example, as we are asking the constraint solver to tackle this problem, really what we're interested in is seeing it construct a chord pitch by pitch. So I actually have a solution to this patch that I have used in the past, and I'm just going to populate it here in this chord sequence box. But you can see this was a solution that this patch, once it is complete, could produce. And you'll note that these pitches are all in an ascending order. Basically that means, for example, we don't have a configuration something like this, where the first note scanning from left to right is actually higher than the note before. And again, if you could imagine that if this whole selection of notes were collapsed into a single vertical chord and we were reading it from bottom to top, of course we would not know the order of these pitches. We would assume that this C was first in the order. In this case, if we scan kind of from left to right and imagine this representation of the chord, we can see that the first note is actually higher than the second. So what we're going to ask the OMCS library to do in this case is ensure that as it goes along, each consecutive note that it finds is acceptable in producing a solution is higher in pitch than the previous one. Now, this partial solution box is actually very cleverly pulling some information from OMCS as it is evaluating a potential solution. So OMCS will start by picking a pitch from this solution space that we described up above, and it will pick a second note from that space and then evaluate it against the rules that we've defined. So that's where this partial solution box comes in. So for example, if we have a partial solution of 4 pitches already and we're evaluating for the 5th, OMCS is going to evaluate this rule. It's going to pull this partial solution and it's going to see that we already have 4 pitches that have been identified. Then as it gets to this E, it's going to ask, well, is this E, is it higher than the previous pitch just immediately in front? Is it higher than this B? And yes, it is. It's also going to ask, is this E found anywhere in the previous solution space in any octave? And we can see that it's not. We have a C, an F, an F sharp, and a B, but no E's up until this point. And then it's also going to take a look at the intervals that it's allowed to use, and it's going to evaluate, is the interval between this B and this E in our list that we will define in just a moment of acceptable intervals. So that's what this partial solution box is doing. At each point, as we're solving, it's scanning along to compare the next possible note in the chord with the notes that have come before. So now that we've got a little bit of a sense for that, we'll return to this patch, and this will be just a very simple patch. We're actually going to add a Lisp function called apply, as well as this less than symbol, and then a simple output. And again, all this apply is doing is asking this next pitch that we're looking at adding compared with this partial solution, is it simply greater than the last pitch of the partial solution that we have? And I'm going to note here that I've actually made a little bit of a mistake that is very easy to make. As I typed in this less than symbol, note that Lisp interpreted, or rather I guess OpenMusic interpreted, that I was interested in populating the Lisp less than function, which I'm actually not interested in doing. I want to produce the string less than. So I'm actually going to shift click to produce a box and then type in less than. And here we will actually pass this symbol into this function. So we're asking this apply function basically to use this this symbol as a way of evaluating. So we will use that little subpatch for now. And now that we've got an output, we're going to go ahead and connect that to our first wildcard rule. So we'll do this process again. We're going to create a new internal patch. We'll call this one, how about just no repeated PCs, pitch classes. So we'll put that right here. We'll go ahead and open that up. And we're going to do a very similar thing. At this point, we're going to add a little input, and we'll add another partial solution box. And now we're going to add a mod box. Let's pull up the documentation for this. This is going to do some modular arithmetic. Oh, no documentation. Well, that's all right. I think that's because it's a Lisp function rather than an OM function. But basically all this is doing is it's going to evaluate an input in modular arithmetic. So for example, if this input is listed in MIDI sense, I can go ahead and populate this second inlet with basically what would be a representation of an octave. So basically all this is doing is accounting for the octave transposition of pitches, and it's a way of saying now we can evaluate C's across the compass of the staff. So for example, evaluating this C and this C, both modulo 1200, this C being 6000 and this C being 7200. This will basically take them both into account. And actually, let's just demonstrate that here for a moment. So if we just do mod, and we'll do, again, 1200, and we'll start with 6000 and evaluate that result, we see that it's 0. So all that's saying is that there's no remainder. There's no remainder when dividing this 6000 by 1200. And now if we evaluate that for 7200, we also see that there's no remainder. So these are effectively in the same equivalence class. All right, so we can now safely understand how that mod box is operating, just again trying to determine if we have repeated a pitch class. So now what we're going to do is we're going to apply that same modulo function. I'm just going to copy and paste those two items, and I'm going to put this mod function on lambda mode and add a mapcar box. I have a tutorial on how mapcar operates and is used in these patches. Again, it's just going to iterate over a list applying a function. So in this case, it's going to iterate over this partial solution that we can pull from the OMCS library and apply this mod 1200. So the other thing that we're going to need to do is actually remove the very last member of the partial solution. So we're going to add this but last box right here. And then we're going to use one more function right here, this Lisp member function. And this is just going to determine if this input over here on the left is a member of the list that we have produced on the right. And finally, because we're interested in not repeating pitch classes rather than repeating a given pitch class, what we want to do is add a final not item, which will kind of negate the input. So what we're saying is, if this new input, if this next possible pitch candidate, as we're constructing this chord, happens to be a member of the partial solution, all of this accounting for octave equivalence with these mod functions, then go ahead and negate that and return a false value, meaning that we're not going to use that potential candidate. And finally, we're going to output that truth value, that Boolean, either true or nil. And that will account for our second rule, no repeated pitch classes. Finally, we're going to do one last rule, and this is the rule about the intervals that we will allow to be used in constructing this chord. So we're going to instantiate one more internal patch. We'll call this allowed intervals. I'm a little inconsistent with my naming conventions, but I think that'll be all right. And we'll open this up. And in this case, we're going to add a couple inputs. copy and paste. So we've got 3 inputs here. And we're going to do OM minus and take the absolute value of that result. And then we're once again going to use that handy member function. And then return all of this to an output. And so this third inlet is where we're going to pass a list of allowed intervals. And these 2 inlets are going to look at, sorry, let me move this down. This first inlet is going to look at the most recently successful candidate pitch as we're constructing the chord. So for example, let me pull up this staff again. So for example, if we have constructed a 4-note partial solution, this input would be taking this B, and this second input would be taking the new candidate pitch. And it's going to calculate the distance between those two. It'll take an absolute value, which again shouldn't be necessary because we've got ascending pitches according to our first rule, but just to be safe. And then it's going to evaluate and see if that that distance, that interval, is a member of the list of approved intervals that we have defined external to this patch. So that's what this patch is doing. So we can close out of those now. And we will go ahead and place this on Lambda mode. Let's go back, oops, I forgot to place this no repeated pitch classes patch also on Lambda mode. And very briefly, we will define our list of allowed intervals. So we'll allow, how about a semitone? We'll allow a fourth. We'll allow the tritone as well as the fifth. And how about a major seventh? So that will be our list of allowed intervals. We'll connect that to this third inlet, and then connect this inlet to this wildcard rule. And so now I think we are at last ready to evaluate this OMCS engine that we've constructed. I'm going to go ahead and connect the output to this chord sequence box. We'll take it off of this locked mode, and we'll go ahead and select that and type V to evaluate. And we can see a solution that OpenMusic has constructed for us. Let's zoom in where we can see this. And we can, let's see. Wondering if it'll let us see the, actually let's do it this way. I wanted to just show that we do indeed have correct ordering for our ascending pitch rule. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and just lock that and evaluate that there. And we can take a look at that in the listener. That'll be easier to see. So we can see the pitches notated here in MIDI sense. Let me just do that so we can compare. And we can see that these are in fact in an ascending order, which again for the purposes of our musical notation is not all that important. But if we wanted to do some further manipulations on this list, it would be important just to see that they were in a correctly sorted order. If we are interested, we could also take a moment to ensure that all of these pitches came from the solution space that we defined. And also we could take a look and confirm that they only used the allowed intervals that we had defined. I have worked with this patch and have been able to confirm that. But let's take a moment just to have some fun and experiment with some other constraints. So for example, if we were to get rid of this semitone constraint, we'll see, I'm curious if this is actually able to produce a solution under those constraints. Let's unlock this box. And we see that it really actually cannot produce a solution. So there are some some collections of constraints that will actually be too constraining for the engine to produce, simply because the mathematical constraints that we have set are not compatible with one another. So let's add in a couple intervals and see, yeah, we can now again produce some sample solutions to this constraint problem. Let's see if we can do another separation of some constraints here. Yeah, so we can actually, and here we see that really there's really just one solution in terms of how we've defined this problem that OMCS is able to arrive at. So as we can see, this is a very helpful tool for rapidly producing some fascinating results. Before I was able to use this OMCS library, I had constructed some patches to do very similar things in terms of constructing chords with these constraints, but I was not able to take advantage of the constraint software that OMCS accesses. And so my patches just had to sort of proceed along a brute force method that was very computationally intensive. So the advantage of these constraint libraries is that they are optimized for solving these sorts of problems and can do so very quickly and very powerfully in a way that is not nearly as computationally intensive as a brute force method. So for example, we'll ask it to compute a number of solutions. Let's get this where we can see them easily together. And so for example, it looks like we've only got a limited number of solutions here. Let's see if we can add some other possible intervals and produce a wider range of solutions. So very quickly we can produce quite a few solutions to a problem like this. And this has just been very helpful to me in my compositional practice for exploring harmonies that I want to use, finding a wide and surprising variety of solutions, and also enjoying a certain amount of freedom in knowing that the solutions that are produced by a technique like this will have a certain sense of organic unity, since they are all produced by the same number of constraint techniques. So that's just a very brief look at the OMCS library. If you're interested, there are actually quite a few different constraint solution libraries for OM. I myself am just at the beginning of looking into these different libraries, but I find them fascinating and certainly very, very useful. So thank you so much for watching this video tutorial today. I hope it has been helpful to you. Again, if you enjoy these videos, take a moment to support them on Ko-fi, take a moment to subscribe to the channel with the button below, and if you're interested in very similar thoughts on music, composing, creativity, do take a moment to subscribe to my email newsletter. Thanks again for watching this video today, and happy patching!